Hello everyone. So this week we're going back to Ionia, which if you remember was Asia Minor, Turkey, Anatolia, to Clazomenae, to talk about, the last in our set of Anaxes. So this is Anaxagoras. We already mentioned Anaxagoras as one of the pluralists who responded to the challenge posed by Parmenides and Zeno, and we'll see how he responded to this challenge. And we also mentioned him in context of Empedocles when we were trying to sort of figure out what his dates were. So we know that he was slightly older than Empedocles, but wrote maybe slightly after. But again, we don't have any exact dates, and there's a lot of confusion about the dates here. But we do know that he was a friend of Pericles, and that he lived in Athens for quite some time and wrote in Athens and taught in Athens, and got into trouble with the people there, with the authorities there as well, for his scientific sort of attitude, probably. He lived there for about 30 years. The dates we guess are between 464 to around 464 BC, so about 30 years he stayed there. He went to Athens at 464 BC, stayed there till about 430, and then he was exiled to Lampascus, where he died in 428 BC, aged about 72, one guesses. So that means that his Floruit would be about, I don't know, 460, 450 again, like Empedocles, which means that he was again a contemporary of sort of early Socrates, young Socrates, or maybe not even that young, Socrates, and Euripides and Sophocles, so all of these. Right, so when we said back to Ionia, we are back in many ways. So he is not as colorful a character as Empedocles, you'd be sad to note, but you might be happy to note that we have come back into the scientific spirit of Ionia, and the same sort of spirit of free inquiry and not much religion entering in here, and sort of, properly scientific temper again. We have also returned to prose as a medium of expression, which I'm a bit sad about because I'm always more fond of verse. And so we have, there's a good thing and bad thing. Bad thing is that we don't have as many fragments from him, for example, as we have from Empedocles. But the good thing is that because with the fragments we have, things seem to be fairly clear, then it might be likely that he actually did not write very much, as many of the commentators argue, that he might have written just one book. Because so Plato mentions in Apology, so Plato's Apology, where Socrates is being accused of not acknowledging any gods, so the kind of thing that Anaxagoras was kicked out of Athens for. And he says, and he's accused that he claims that the sun is made of rock and the moon of earth, which is something that, by the way, Anaxagoras was accused of. So this is Socrates being accused of things that Anaxagoras was previously accused of. And so Socrates replies saying, "My dear Meletus, do you imagine that it is Anaxagoras you are accusing? Do you have such contempt for the jury and imagine them so illiterate as to not know that the books by Anaxagoras of Clazomenae are crammed with such assertions? What's more, are the young learning those things from me when they can, are the young learning those things from me, when they can acquire them at the bookstalls and in the bookstores now and then for a drachma at most, so 1 coin, 1 drachma at most, which obviously did not cost that much, that means, so it couldn't have been that long a book. And so ridicule Socrates if he claims those ideas for his own, especially when they're so bizarre." Right. So this kind of so the defense that he is giving to the jury, Socrates, he mentions Anaxagoras, and he mentions Anaxagoras's book. So he might have written just that one book, though there are a few others attributed to him. So there's a treatise on scene painting and on perspective that is attributed to him, and something on eclipses and illumination. So there are a lot of books that are attributed to him, but we don't have any evidence that they were actually written by him. Although the book on perspective, so claims Guthrie, actually does show something about his system, right? It sort of illuminates his sort of philosophical system, and you will see that we are moving now into perspective. Already what happened with Parmenides and Zeno was that we moved into this kind of a two-dimensional or one-dimensional space, I don't know. And with Empedocles, we saw the introduction of plural elements and forces and all kinds of things in this, very dynamic world. And with Anaxagoras, you will see that, there's a perspective that is added of the tiniest thing, infinitesimal and infinite, and the dialectic of the infinitesimal and the infinite that Anaxagoras argues for. So, in that sense, he might have actually, he might have written that treatise on scene painting. Although, as far as I know, Kirk and Raven sort of argue, Kirk, Raven, and Schofield, actually, all three of them. So they argue that, he might have not written that treatise on scene painting or on perspective writings. Yeah. So they say that. He's supposed to have written probably just one book, which was probably not very long, fairly short, because the fragments that we have from Simplicius, and I think Simplicius is the main source of our fragments generally, that it could, and then we have the statement in Plato's Apology that it could be bought for 1 drachma. So they claim that probably he did not write that much at all. In that book, and then the treatise on perspective and another on the squaring of the circle, if they existed at all, are most unlikely to have been his genuine work. So that's what they claim. So that means that we have actually a lot of his writings, and they weren't that much, if we believe this claim, that is. Now, who was he? He was also a very interesting character. So Diogenes Laertius is sort of this small fragment from his Lives of Philosophers. So I'll just read it out for you. He says, he's said to have been 20 years old at the time of Xerxes' crossing. So that gives us a bit of a date, but it's still confusing because he gives too many dates out here. And to have lived to 72, as I said, died in Lampascus, where he was exiled at the age of 72. I'll skip the parts in the middle. Sotion in his Succession of Philosophers says that he was prosecuted by Cleon. Cleon was one of the sort of archons in Athens for impiety because he maintained that the sun was a red-hot mass of metal, and that after Pericles, his pupil, had made a speech in his defense, he was fined 5 talents and exiled. So instead of being sentenced to death, he was sort of fined and exiled because Pericles, his friend and student, apparently, supported him. Satyrus in his Lives, on the other hand, says that the charge was brought by Thucydides and his political campaign against Pericles. And he adds that the charge was not only for impiety, but for Maidism, sort of Persianism, whatever, as well. And he was condemned to death in absence. Finally, he withdrew to Lampascus and there died. And this part I like the best. He says, it is said that when the rulers of the city asked him what privilege he wished to be granted, he replied that the children should be given a holiday every year in the month in which he died. The custom is preserved to the present day. That's such a nice thing, right? What do you want? What is your one wish? That the children should be given a holiday for 1 whole month. That's where the custom comes from, your summer vacation. I'm not sure if it comes from there. So we have a bit of an idea about his life, about his times, about his friendships, about his enmities. Plato also mentions his friendship to Pericles. In Phaedrus, he says, Pericles acquired high-mindedness in addition to his natural talents, for he fell in with Anaxagoras, who already possessed this quality, and steeping himself in natural speculation and grasping the true nature of mind and folly, which were the subjects of much of Anaxagoras' discussion, he drew from the source anything that could contribute towards the art of debate. So Pericles as a student of Anaxagoras, and Anaxagoras as a scientific natural philosopher who was teaching in Athens for many years and taught such powerful people. Right, so we have these few things from him, and as I already said, amongst his writings, the one that we are sure about is this one book, which is, we don't have a name, probably, again attributed, Peripusios, on nature. But he's also ascribed these books, which we don't have, on perspective, on squaring of the circle, etc., which we don't have. Now, enough about his life, his books, general sort of kinds of conversation. What did he bring to the table because we are doing a kind of history of pre-Socratic philosophy up to the atomists, So what did he bring to the table? So he is another of these big challenges to Parmenides and Zeno, and in a very different way from Empedocles. So he not only challenges Parmenides, he challenges Zeno head on, and it's actually fascinating to see how he challenges Zeno, because he basically says, well, yes, everything is infinitely divisible, and that means that the biggest thing is the smallest thing. Remember the paradox on plurality that Zeno sort of put forward, where he says that, well, if everything is infinitely divisible, then it contains infinite sort of things of some magnitude, and if everything has some magnitude, then it is infinitely big or infinitely small. And Anaxagoras faces that dilemma, sort of, like rebutting the dilemma kind of a thing, like takes it by the horn and says, well, everything is big or and small at the same time, and he believes that this is not a contradiction at all. So we'll see how he gets to that point and what kind of philosophy he's making, but you can, just with this, you can guess the kind of challenge that he's posing to the Parmenidean canon, and it really sort of gives us something that will help us understand, the history of philosophy and the history of ideas, and the development of the idea of perspective in it, and which is why probably this book on perspective was attributed to him. Right? So what did he accept from Parmenides? He basically accepted the canons from Parmenides, that there was no coming into being and there was no perishing, and also that there was no void, there was no gap. If you remember, we had that with Empedocles as well, when he talks about the clepsydra, the water, what's it called? In which the experiment, which I don't remember if I talked about, where he blows it, if you blow into that, you put that thing into water, you blow into it, and the water will not rise up to the air because because air is occupying that space. So the idea of the corporeality of air, which means that even what seems like empty space is, made of real matter. And Anaximenes, for example, was the first one to talk about the corporeality of invisible air. And in fact, some people go so far as to call Anaxagoras a student of Anaximenes, which is impossible time-wise. But he might have been influenced by him, right? So basically what he does is, like Empedocles, he again talks about plurality and plural elements, and he talks about not about coming to being and perishing, because there is no what is not. He accepts that from Parmenides. So he has to again talk about, composition and dissolution, mixture and separation, but he does it in a way very different from Empedocles, because for Empedocles, you had these sort of four elements, the four primary Parmenidean elements, sort of a thing, and in this sense, mixture and separation was of these Parmenidean elements getting together and separating, while with Anaxagoras, that's not the case. You have an infinite mixture, and we'll see what that infinite mixture means. But you have an infinite mixture, so you have a different idea of what is being mixed. Second, for Empedocles, if you remember, you had love and strife. So coming together and separating, and that's what is like coming into being and destruction. While here with Anaxagoras, it's a constant movement. It's not a clear love and strife kind of a thing in which there are two movements. There's a phase of love in which things come together, and then a phase of strife in which things are pulled apart, and that's sort of coming into being and separation of a sort, or mixture and separation. But for Anaxagoras, that's not how he would understand it. Right, so he's different from Empedocles in that sense. and also in the sense that he did not talk about four roots, but about infinite number of natural substances, which we'll get to when we talk about his theory of matter. And very importantly, he came up with a single force. So instead of love and strife as these opposite forces, in fact, he doesn't talk about a force at all. He talks about this, this really subtle matter, right? This very tiny matter, and which he calls mind, right? So he does a mind-matter separation, and this is the first time now that there's a clear separation between mind and matter, and this nous or mind is the structuring principle. It's what structures matter entirely. So we are moving towards a very strong sense of dualism. As I said, even Empedocles can be counted as a dualist in which you have forces and matter. Here you have mind and matter, but here it's a more clearly phrased dualism, because you have infinite matter and an infinite mind, and they are separate, and then the mind sort of acts upon matter to move it and to change it, right? So we'll get into the details of Anaxagoras' sort of theory. So I will probably talk in three sections. One would be his reply to Parmenides and Zeno, which I've already done to some extent. Then his theory of mind, his theory of matter, and finally his cosmology, cosmogony, and zoogony. So that's it. Thank you.